Hello, I'm Benerson Little, author of several books on piracy. I'm also a former Navy SEAL. I was the historical consultant to Black Sails for all four seasons. And today we're going to be looking at clips from video games. And I do touch on and look at these video games, so I'm somewhat familiar with them. And I think I'm drifting off. It's your classic, I might want to say caricature of pirates. It looks much like it was inspired by anything from Pirates of the Caribbean, Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean ride. In the UK, they would call the pantomime of the pirates. This is definitely, oh, Monkey Island.
Oh yeah,
Tales from
yeah.
Monkey Island also definitely looks like. And I know they have done both Pirates of the Caribbean and Monkey Island
Oh
offshoots for the
really?
game
Huh.
too.
Didn't know
Yes.
that.
Yes, you can kind of go in and play Monkey Island and run through almost, I think, the original game. I'm not sure. I don't have a lot of time to play games, and to
Yeah,
be honest, I'm one of those people that if I get stuck on a hard part, I'll either drop the game or find a cheat if I can find a cheat because I don't have a lot of time, and I'm really more there for the journey and watching it almost
yeah,
like I'm watching a movie and kind of participating in a movie as
yeah.
opposed to, I got to rack up those big scores.
Right.
I'm not sure pirates ever played any of these instruments in the 17th or early 18th century. There's nothing wrong with that. The actual instruments probably played back then were fiddles, what they call today a Jaws harp. You may have had some trumpeters going in there. Maybe on a Spanish vessel, you might have had a guitar, possibly some bagpipes,
Oh
particularly
yeah.
played in action occasionally. But
No, and I think they have the instruments here. I think it's a hurdy-gurdy and an
mhm.
accordion. And I think the accordion, of course, is like very associated with pirates, but it's an early like 19th century instrument. I think it was
Mhm.
invented.
Yeah.
Whereas the
It's
hurdy-gurdy, I think in one of the San Malo shipwrecks, I think they found a remnant of a hurdy-gurdy, like one of the components.
Mhm.
So it might have appeared on some occasions.
Yeah, I will say one thing I noticed about this game, as very good as it can make you seasick very quickly.
Oh, guess it's very realistic then.
Okay. And here we have what very typical, I think, of a lot of pirate games. You've got a lot of speed, more speed than you're actually going to have. They've got very arcade aspects to it. And I understand that that's part of gaming. A few things about video games in general and pirate video games I've noticed, particularly in sea combat, there's a very arcade aspect to it. In this case, it's good because it's really single combat between two ships. It's not like some games where Skull and Bones, for example, where there's multiple ships and you're sinking ships one after the other almost like a space pirate game or something where you'd be shooting down spaceships.
Mm.
But the pace is always very fast, very because you don't want your players to get bored, 3 minutes between broadsides, it would be very good historically. I've calculated 6, 7, 8 minutes between broadsides before with a lot of maneuvering. So you got the pace kicked up in an arcade game manner. You've also got ships firing at each other while they're moving rapidly past each other, and that's really very rare. You don't want to miss, you don't want to race or waste your shot. So what you're really going to do is try to get as close within about 250 yards, and often preferably closer than that. And at that point, make your shot count. And they're going to aim at one of three spots on the vessels with elevation. You're either going to point it down a little bit and time it with the vessel's roll to fire at the water line in the hull, or you're going to shoot at the decks, which would be to kill personnel, damage personnel, often splinters. And this is historically accurate, causing much more damage than the round shot themselves, Mythbusters notwithstanding. Here you've got, the quick pace, ships are firing while they're moving in opposite directions, but also importantly, the the vessels are acting almost as if they're power vessels.
Mm,
It doesn't seem to be taking as much account into the wind direction.
mm,
You're not, vessels, they're not really tacking, wearing, box hauling, doing the things you would normally see in a ship combat action when they get close together. For example, you give a broadside and then maybe you tack or wear to come about, bring your other broadside under the stern or something like that, for example. Real fighting seems to be much more tactical, long. It could take hours if somebody was really, really trying, um, yeah, obviously, to defend themselves well. You'd have to do a lot of damage to the vessel, either reduce the number of personnel or damage the rigging,
yeah.
the mast enough so that you could come alongside and board. But this is fun. It's very exciting. I'm not complaining about it. I'm not criticizing it or anything. It's fun to play. And I do like aspects of this game. I do like because the sea is very authentic. The vessels do bounce around. Like I
Right.
said, you can get seasick watching it from this first person perspective that they have. You know,
Yeah, I'm not sure if they added vomiting to the game. They might have. I haven't played this one for a sick
well,
bag.
they should because there's no sailor that's not going to vomit at some point. I don't care how good the sea legs are. The damage control is good. You would have a carpenter below deck, so you can carpenter in some mates often with plugs to plug shot holes. Man at the pumps, keep the pumps going. I'm assuming this is somebody, yeah, who's what, going to board the. Um, yeah, historically, you don't really find people swimming to board ships. Hollywood loves it, but we don't really find that done historically. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I always enjoyed playing this game. I actually had played Pirates Gold on 3.5 floppies many, many, many years
Oh
ago.
yeah. Yeah, that
Mhm.
is an old one.
Yeah, I do. I didn't mind this land combat. It was one of the few games where actually tried to be historically accurate. In if you're going to take a town, you're going to attack it by land, typically. Um, although it's turn-based, it still gives you a sense of being able to use cover and maneuver. It doesn't entirely reflect the actual tactics, but at least they do have, for example, Buccaneers are not quite in as much of a formal line. They're grouped, but not really in lines like the Spanish are. So
Yeah.
there's a legitimate attempt here, I think, to at least have some historical patina on the game. As I recall, it was fairly accurate too in some ways. If you're using cover, you get the higher ground. Um, you could hide some of your forces
Yeah.
under cover and concealment, so that they can attack from the flanks and things. But yes, this was a fun game to play. But I did really, really like this, that at least you're gonna have to get out, fight open, you know, um, fight on the terrain outside the city. Yeah, and I did like the fact that you had to go and get your ships repaired. You couldn't exactly repair your ships during combat, which a lot of games let you do, and you can make minor repairs during combat, but you can't do anything significant. A lot of games want your ships to be armored. There's not really a lot of ways that you can armor upgrade a ship.
Yeah.
That seems to be very much in common with a lot of video games, to kind of grind your way through getting the resources to upgrade.
Yeah, it's a shame that there aren't like, of course, the big modifications that pirates and privateers and buccaneers would have done to their ship would have been shaving and cutting down the upper sections and stuff
Yeah,
and adding
yeah,
oars and gun ports. But I've never heard about it being featured in any video game,
yeah,
which is,
yeah. We need a game which has careening and need a game where if
yeah,
you were going to do anything, you capture a Spanish ship with a high stern, you cut it down so that to improve its handling characteristics. But you can't add really armor to ships or any of the kind of things we see in a lot of games. Not that they're not fun, but it's not accurate by any means. Mhm. Classic recruiting, which is where much of it was done. I think we've got somebody trying to sell a treasure map there for a minute. Yeah, historically accurate or not, we do have to have the dueling. There was dueling. I'm not kind of a very romantic Alexander Dumas, Raphael Sabatini type. Flip in the air, probably started by Douglas Fairbanks and continued. Always nice to have a barmaid have your back.
So the governor.
Which is fairly accurate. I'm not sure governors were trying to hand their daughters off to pirates and buccaneers very often, though. I will say this is the one part of the game I hated. And I think I
Yeah, it's
recall years ago downloading a cheat that would just let me, you know, just hit the cheat, do the dancing for me, get the points, and then go on to. Because to be honest, I don't really dance anyway, you know.
oh oh, I love dancing, and
And
I've grown to love the mini game, but I know quite a lot of people have a dislike towards it.
I, I suspect that the governor's daughter will be more impressed with how much gold and silver he had than how well he danced. I do like the fact that both games, I think I definitely remember it from the floppy disk version I was playing. The collecting of intelligence was nice, was a nice
Yeah,
touch. Also, I have to say the documentation included with the games was a nice touch. It was very historical, and they actually let you play in different periods with
yeah,
changes during the periods as well. It was
yeah.
very nicely done. It's kind of rare. It's it's probably the best, most historical of the games I've seen that has actually tried to at least lend some legitimacy to the game with real history and in the materials, at least try to educate. It's nice touches, at least trying, and I think they know their audience. You know, we all wanted that hot swashbuckling Hollywood. And this
Yeah.
game, I think, more than any other game, emulates those 1930s and 40s Hollywood films that we all loved. You
Mm.
know, Captain Blood, The Seahawk,
Yeah.
The Spanish Main. What was the other big one? The Black Swan, which was really nothing like the novel, or not much like the novel, but still, these, except for Captain Blood, this glorious Technicolor with all of the pirate tropes, the dueling and sea battles and ship attacks and Spanish towns.
Yeah, and I think it is interesting this game because I think it released in the same year as the first Pirates of the Caribbean, and it seems to be kind of the last sort of breath of a sort of portrayal of this sort of older media image of pirates, where it's more swashbuckling and colorful. Whereas after Pirates of the Caribbean, it has sort of drifted towards being more like gritty and dark, you know, with Black Sails and Assassin's Creed. A lot of those games have a more sort of darker take on pirates, which,
Certain fantasy elements too. I'm really
yeah,
a proponent of romantic realism. I'd like to see them pull it back a little bit. I mean, you can have dark and gritty and the more romantic side too.
right. So we're gonna move on to the next clip, which is gonna be from Assassin's Creed 4.
And Mhm. This is Sea of Thieves again.
No, Assassin's Creed 4.
Oh, Assassin's Creed 4. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Is that Black Flag or the one just
Yeah,
prior to it?
yeah, Black
Black
Flag,
Flag.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think I ever played any of the games in Black Flag. I played it a fair amount, but I don't think I ever went into anything. Like I said, I'm in a hurry and too lazy to try to learn the games.
Yeah, I have a bit of a context why I included this one specifically. Because bit of a story time. Because I did a was gonna do a video on Assassin's Creed like 2 years ago, I think. So I wanted to replay the game because I played it originally when it released in
Yeah.
2014.
Mhm.
So I wanted to play it again. And I actually didn't enjoy it too much. I didn't like the game, but I ended up playing this like board game because I wanted to try it out, this
Mhm.
Five Man's Morris or whatever it's called. And they have really overtuned the AI for playing that game. So it's very hard to beat. And I'm kind of opposite to you. Like when I play a game and I meet a challenge, I kind of just I need to win. So I'm a very stubborn person, so I just keep going and going and going and going. And in this game, you always play for money when you play that board game. So,
Hmm.
my character, the part I played, I ran out of money. So in order to get more money, I had to go out and pirate and rob ships and steal money so I can feed my gambling addiction. Which, especially when you read about, Exquemelin and those accounts about Port Royal, there's a lot of them who speak about, and a lot of the governors, I think Lynch and Modiford sending letters, they write about how a lot of these Port Royal pirates would get in debt and build up a huge credit in the taverns and the gambling houses and stuff.
Hmm.
And that would force a lot of them to have to go and pirate, and a lot of them were afraid to return to Port Royal and get in the hands of the debt collectors and stuff.
Yeah, it's a uh, yeah. These guys come back, get drunk, chase women, and then gamble everything away, and plenty of people waiting, ready to take their money from them. We know they play dice a lot. There's on
Yeah,
the cover of one 17 demonstration, they have a nice little panel on the title page. Has multiple illustrations in that frontispiece. But they have a nice little panel of what's clearly a tavern. There's money strewn on the floor and somebody trying to pick it up, people playing dice. They're also playing a board game that looks like backgammon. I think was the precursor
yeah,
to it. Now, I don't know how accurate that is, but, again, you've got a board game right here too in the game. So
yeah.
it's in Assassin's Creed. So I'm sure they didn't just play dice, but I suspect that's what most of the seamen were playing, the common Buccaneers. You could lose your money really fast.
Yeah, definitely.
That is funny though. You have to go back to see to get the game. I may have tried this one time and said I'm not wasting. Yeah, it's a nice little touch here that they give you a chance. Historically, as your captain, you're not going to steer or be firing the swivels or anything, but it is a nice touch that they let you as a player do all of these things. Um, you're taking on 3 or 4 ships at a time. It's suicidal. I mean, you're going to be finished. Most privateers were thin-sided. One sea captain called them thin-sided tools because they're built for speed and they tend to be built cheaply. So
Yeah.
if you captured a stout merchant, that's one thing. You've got a little more protection. If you captured, a warship, you've got more protection. But a lot of these vessels are not going to be up armored, as we've talked about already in these games. Lots of, first-rate vessels, not going to happen. And you're certainly not going to defeat one. But again, I do like the fact that you can, in this game, that you could do some of the steering, which gives you effective command and control of the vessel itself. Oh, it's another nice touch too, is that there are muskets that you can use. That was a very dominant weapon. And I know you can use pistols in the boarding combat too. Historically, boarding actions, while they could descend into this kind of melee combat or pell-mell combat, let me stop that for a second and point out this. This is, we all know this is completely historically inaccurate, these lifts jumping up there, but it is a nice Douglas Fairbanks touch. It has Hollywood pirate, but it's an homage in a lot of ways to the old
Mm.
Douglas Fairbanks films. You cut the line and well, it's Crimson Pirate with Burt Lancaster, and you get launched up and aloft and um, we do know that during boarding actions, particularly if the ship was well defended from close quarters, the boarders would often find themselves having to climb aloft so that they wouldn't get killed, by men firing from loopholes on the decks.
Mm.
But if the ship had been prepared properly, they would pick these guys off the shrouds and in the tops too from the deck. If there was any chance that they were going to get overrun, they would retreat to closed quarters. It's basically they barricade themselves within the ship, defend themselves from loopholes. They'd even take ship's guns, cannon, turn them lengthwise out of small ports from these bulkheads and just slaughter the boarders in the decks. They would even set something called powder chests, which are small mines, and then they would fire that from beneath the deck. But anyway, if the closed quarters were prepared correctly and well, they would also have loopholes in the deck so that they could fire aloft. And there are accounts of boarders
Mm.
being forced into the rigging aloft and then being picked off from the closed quarters. So, we're not historically accurate here, but I mean, there is some historical and definitely Hollywood um, precedent for what they're doing. And it's fun. I do
Yeah.
remember one thing it was fun to do too is leave the captain, I think it was, alive so that you could fight and kill everybody else on the deck first.
Yeah,
Just
I
basic.
don't I don't remember if they had like how if they had like a set number of the crew or if the crew just like reinforced
Mhm.
indefinitely from the hold.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I remember clearing the decks. You look at whatever the requirements for finishing the boarding action were, and then ignore one of those, and then you could take out all the crew, and then you could finally go finish the last one. I would kind of Hollywood it if it was taking out the captain, try to wipe his crew out first, and then go take out the captain, have that final, you
Right,
know,
yeah. Duel.
that final classic duel. I'm sorry, we do have at least one historical account of privateers. Was it Rene Duguay-Touron, I think, who actually boarded a vessel and got the captain to surrender at sword point.
Oh.
So it's kind of the exception that proves the rule.
So now we're gonna move on to Skull and Bones. And of course, you have done some work with Skull and Bones. Do you wanna tell us about that?
I did a bit when the game, it got postponed for a long time because I guess, the early examples they released for playtesting, they got very negative reviews.
Hmm.
So they pulled the game. It was for a long, long time. I remember I was originally under contract for the initial release, and then of course I lost all of that, and I figured
Right.
I wouldn't hear from them again. But they did get the game eventually released. Mostly they had me just looking at the game and doing some marketing for the release, things like
Okay.
that. I really didn't have much to do with the development itself, although they did talk to me a lot about, essentially asking if I could confirm certain aspects of the game as historically accurate. And um, they've done a really good job as far as the locations, I think. It's still a bit what I call Hollywood, but
Hmm.
it really does evoke the sense of Madagascar and the African coast and the Far East, particularly, what's today is known as Singapore, Malaysia.
Right.
And they bring the various factions in. It's a very arcadey game, though. It's really focused on the sea combat and a lot of what I guess gamers call grinding, having to get your resources so that you can upgrade your ships and do all these kind of there's an incredible variety of fantasy weapons that you can use. But it does have some nice points. As you're sailing along, you can actually watch the cannon firing and recoiling, and if you're actually paying attention to that and not on your targets. But yeah, we can go ahead. It's with the clip if you like. Okay, this is one area I was hoping you bring up a clip of something like this, and this applies to pretty much most pirate games, but not all of them, is the ships attacking fortifications. It's really not going to happen. The ship is going to get shot to pieces. Now, there are a few exceptions to that, and I'll go into them real quick, but primarily, first, most pirate, privateer, or even commerce rating naval vessels are not large enough to do any damage to any significant fortification. But on the other hand, fortifications have large cannon. We're going to call them cannon because they're ashore. If they're at sea, we're going to call them guns. They're easier to aim. The fort's not moving like the ship is. When ships did engage fortification, 17th, 18th, let's say the first up to the first half of the 18th century, they did so from anchor. You can almost never find a ship under sail moving past the fortification and firing on it. And when you do, it's more of a parting shot, or that fortification is just going to slaughter you. Now, some people may bring up some historical examples where it did happen. You had in the 18th century the English taking Portobello, the iron fort right at the entrance of the channel. But basically, what they did there, it was a land operation. They ran their ships up really close to open fire on the fortifications as land forces were storming the walls. This was essentially in support of a land operation. Sometimes these very large men of war, not the smaller types of privateers and pirates, in conjunction with the land operation can do it. I've run across a couple of accounts of British East India Company ships attacking Indian fortifications, but the fortifications were clearly small and not well manned at all, in which case they could safely do it because there really wasn't much resistance. And a lot of this started with Raphael Sabatini, Captain Blood. Great novel. I love it. I'm annotating it right now. He did get this part wrong about the ships coming in and whether in part, he was probably just misinformed. What a lot
Hmm.
of writers, novelists have done is they have relied, his nautical language is often anachronistic because, I mean, if you're a novelist and you've got 6 months and you're trying to write, your epic novel, you can't spend 10 years researching it, especially areas that there's no existing secondary source that compiles all this information. So you go with
Yep.
what you've got, which for him would have been 19th century, sea language, and also naval accounts, late 18th, early 19th century. And there's a lot of stuff Napoleonic, which is why Sabatini's ships are overgunned. He's talking about 32 pounders, which is not going to
Yep.
happen. So in fairness to him, he's using the information he had. But anyway, that started it, and I would say that probably Disney put the nail in it that everybody has to have it because Disney's that opening scene in Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean ride that opened up in the 60s. The scene is that scene of the pirate ship attacking, the Wicked Wench attacking the Spanish, well, it's supposed to be originally Buccaneers attacking a Spanish town, is inspired directly by Captain Blood. All right. I do know that the frigate in this game, all these games, you can put a deck-mounted weapon like a mortar, which is really historically accurate. There were mortar vessels, but again, they have to anchor. Those are special vessels. The pirates weren't using them. I'm not counting the small cohorn mortar, which is
Hmm.
basically throwing a grenade at close range.
Yeah.
That's not going to do much damage except some small personnel damage. But again, you see the arcade notion of the pirate games, the ship's moving very well, very quickly. You're not having to adjust the sails.
Yeah.
I know for a fact, having, played this game, that I can run up one side and then across the stern, and then, by then I reloaded, can fire the broadside again on the far side. But yeah, it's basically an arcade game, but it's got some very nice graphics. Lots and lots of ship designs and all kinds of ways of tweaking things, which is, not historically accurate at all, but it's fun gameplay, I suppose. You like it. I mean, I've played the game a fair amount.
Yeah, and it's a very underrated setting as well. I've never
Hmm.
played the game, but I remember like seeing the first trailer when it released. Like, I mean, oh, I think it's almost 10 years ago, and you see like the shoreline of the Indian subcontinent,
Hmm.
and there's like an elephant walking on the beach, and there's like a ship sailing in the background, and I think that really captured the feel of these the Red Sea Men as
It
they were called,
it
the
does. It
Henry
has a
Every and
very
those.
Yeah, it has a very nice feel for that. It's much more culturally diverse than most pirate
Mm.
games are, which is also nice.
So moving on to the next one, and this is going to be a game you're not familiar with, and which is a bit of a strange inclusion. That is World of Warcraft. So World of Warcraft, it's not a historical setting; it's a completely fictional setting, which is set in
Hmm.
a on a different planet, a different universe, and it's a pretty old setting at this point, dating to the 90s. And ever since the second game, there has actually been a very big naval focus in the game. And in the preceding games before World of Warcraft, you could actually control ships and steer ships around and have like a navy and fight over resources for building ships and stuff. So there are definitely going to be residual elements of the maritime theme in the
Hmm.
big game. And they did like an expansion, I think almost 8 years ago or something, which had a big naval focus, which takes you to a new continent, which is sort of akin to the British Isles, I suppose. It's an island, and this island is it's very politically divided, which means that pirates have cropped up, and they are being funded by a political group to fulfill various political needs and
Hmm.
such. And they have their own little base, which is what we're going to take a look at in this clip.
All right, and this is multiplayer, right? Is that
Yeah.
correct? Yeah. Okay.
Unlike Borealis, it has no rules or regulations about what vessels are allowed to dock. Privateers, mercenaries, even pirates are welcome. Naturally, it's a colourful town. I've never seen it this busy before. Something big must be going down. I bet my boots will find more ash vein weapons at the docks. We need to learn who's buying them.
I am out of range.
Hmm. I remember that. What is that? Was that a swordfish?
think it's like a
Um,
swordfish and a shark or something.
yeah, yeah. It's amazing the body counts you can rack up in video games.
No, definitely.
This is, well, right here you got the classic trope. I mean, even George MacDonald Fraser in his comic novel Pirates has this, the ships filled with treasure. In his case, he's making a kind of a comic homage to pirate films, but talking about how big they are, how large they are. There's always, some hidden treasure inside the hold that somebody's forgot, and it's always thousands and thousands of pieces of gold. At least in the Golden Age, would have been mostly silver with
Oh yeah.
some gold and, maybe some jewels and pearls and things like that. Yeah, pirate games in general, I think and Pirates Gold was, or Sid Meier's Pirates is probably an exception, but you could rack up massive amounts of silver and gold in ships often. And I guess the criticism I had of them is either there's not enough, plunder, or there's too much plunder
Hmm.
on the ship. Video games, for some reason, seem to really like that, and maybe it's just for the visuals. They like having a lot of elevated geography, vastly elevated, and I'm assuming it has something to do with your backgrounds and looks better. I'm not quite sure why, but in most games, you're going to see a lot of elevated geography like this. It historically, while there are some rocky mountainous coasts, in most places it's more flat, and as you approach it, you've got shelving um, water depth as you go up, and then flat beaches, and most places from a distance look very flat. I know Assassin's Creed Black Flag likes building up things, and I'm guessing this is primarily for a visual type perspective. The
Yeah.
real pirate hideouts of the Golden Age were very small, not well fortified at all. I know even Sabatini describes, he calls it Cayona or Cayenne, which
Yeah.
was actually the town right next, which was actually where the rich people lived next to Tortuga. But if you actually look at the drawings of the planned fortifications and the existing fortifications at Tortuga, they're very, very small. You're looking at a small fort built upside on a hill, but really not as high as you would think it is. None of these, the Spanish had some huge fortifications, but not pirates. Now, I don't know what in antiquity what some of these pirate lairs would have looked at. They may have had, there were a lot of far, far, far more pirates, privateers in antiquity. Something else that applies to all of these games is how close everything is. You really don't have to sail for that long, and that's a natural design. You don't want to be spending hours at sea just plodding along doing nothing because, gamers, you won't play the game. But maybe it's just a coincidence, but J.M. Barrie in Peter Pan actually figured this out first. There's a line where he points out that in Neverland, everything's close together because you don't want your adventures to be too far away. You can obviously see that here, and you can see that in most video games. You don't want to sail too far along. Everything's close together, a few minutes away. It's almost like a dream, which in some ways kind of maybe lucid dreaming and
Yeah.
inspired, Peter Pan and the Neverland.
You remarked a bit earlier about the Pirates of Antiquity, which is very relevant because the last clip we're going to take a look at is from Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
Yeah. Now, I've played this game a fair amount. I enjoyed it. Um, And I did enjoy the sea combat. I think in some ways it might be more accurate than your average Golden Age pirate film. I mean, again,
Mm.
it's got an arcade aspect to it where you're taking out multiple ships, you're sailing very, very quickly, but you do have the opportunity to use, your bow and arrow and other weapons. You do have the opportunity for boarding actions, and you can use that ram, which Assassin's Creed also had, Pirate Black Flag had also, which would be entirely historically inaccurate. But here, it's actually legitimate.
No, and I think like you say about the accuracy of this game, I didn't play this one too much, but I think it does kind of prove that you could more or less portray more accurate pirate tactics in video games and still make it fun. Because you often see like a lot of people, they seem to think like unless if you have like the super big ships, like the
Hmm.
ships of the line
Yeah.
rated ships or whatever, and lots of cannons and guns, it cannot be fun. Whereas I mean, in
Yeah.
this one, you basically have a very typical uh, pirate ship. A piragua, is basically just a galley, a small galley with
Yeah.
oarsmen and musketeers as the primary. Whereas here you have archers, just slap some muskets on them instead and have them on a sloop or a piragua or a half galley, and it's basically the same as this, but it's very accurate like pirate combat. And you can still
Yeah.
like even with muskets, it's you
Hmm.
might not be able to pierce the hull of the ship like you do here, but you can, destroy the rigging, which could precede boarding combat like you see in
Yeah.
this game and the other
Yeah,
ones.
in Skull and Bones defense, they do give you opportunity to fire musket volleys as well, which is nice.
Mm,
It's
cool.
that people pop up and you get to do it. I did enjoy this game. I like the scenery. It looked like they put a fair amount of research into trying to get historical locations accurate. The sea combat is nice because I don't think people realize, or most the average um, reader or game player or moviegoer realizes that in antiquity there were thousands of what we would call today privateers, basically mercenaries by sea. They were not only robbing their own benefit, they'd also hire their services out. And we're talking thousands of them
Yeah.
with their own vessels, their own ports. And this game does convey a sense of that, that you can go in, agree to fight for Sparta or Athens,
Hmm.
come in. And like I said, I do like that it's fairly historically accurate. I'm still not sure how well fire arrows would actually
Hmm.
work. We see them in Hollywood all the time, but I've talked to several people over the years who have tried to make them work, and they say they really don't work very well.
No, so that was the final clip of today. Do you have any concluding thoughts that you wanna share?
Probably mostly thoughts that I've made before. They're nice substitutes. I really for or augmentations, I suppose, to novels and movies and things like that. They at least let you have some of the decision-making process and get involved in it. I still have a pipe dream that somebody will make a fairly historically accurate pirate video game.
Hmm.
It can't be entirely historically accurate, but there's a lot of things that we could do with it. Just if since I know the history as well. I mean, there's so many branches and things you could go off into
Yeah.
during there. Everything from you could have entire plot lines built on cutting logwood and Spanish attacks
Yeah.
there, and literally trying to work your way up, to becoming a captain, smaller, larger vessels. And I think it could be made exciting enough, even with legitimate, historically accurate vessels and things like that. One thing I have noticed about Skull and Bones is that the sea combat can get pretty intense, and I think there are ways to convey that, even using smaller craft,
Yeah.
um, and moving it up where you don't have to, go over the top, with 1,000 different weapons and have lightning strokes and kraken coming out of the seas. I think it could do without it. I'm probably trying to make a sales pitch here, but um,
No, and I think that could be a fun episode to do potentially in the future, like talking about ideas and potential stuff for a cool, historically accurate pirate game or something like that.
yeah, I think people would play it if you could get it out because you see a lot of criticisms of games. It's quite obvious that people, um, and again, I don't know what the percentage of people who are looking for historical accuracy is, and if, to be honest, even reading, looking at historical fiction right now, it
Mm.
might be, the percentage of who actually want the historical accuracy I might be overestimating it, but I keep wondering whether it's video games or films, how much is Hollywood or video game developers doing what they know has worked in the past as opposed to, trying to change.
Which one of these games did you find the most interesting that we looked at today?
Assassin's Creed Odyssey,
Mm.
which actually kind of surprised me when I played that. I was quite familiar with the history. I'd even written a couple of chapters on it in
Mm.
pirate hunting. Um, and for me, it was nice just to, go into a little bit different era and see how people had depicted that. There are positive elements, things I like in all of the games, and that might be another thing to look at. Pick these things out, from Black Flag. You've got the boarding actions, are a lot of fun, and you've got the swivels and muskets and put those weapons in. Like it, Skull and Bones, the naval combat does seem to get pretty intense at times. The backgrounds, the towns and things are a little bit more historically accurate than they are, for example, in Black Flag, Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Um, but of all the games, I think the one that is a lot of ways probably more, it probably had the best combination of historical accuracy with that Hollywood swashbuckler we like is still Sid Meier's Pirates. It probably needs an update or somebody to take a game somewhat inspired on that. I don't know if there's any plans on re-releasing it again, but it could take it a little bit less from the cartoony swashbuckling and push it more in the center. I think Sea of Thieves is still doing pretty well too. There's a lot of people playing that. That's your classic kind of a pantomime pirate game, which has got all the elements that you want, attacks at sea. I said I've only played it a few times and played it solitary, which is not
Yeah.
the best way as far as I can tell. You really need a crew for it. And
Yeah. Strike up the band, literally.
yeah, yeah, that's a little more that's a little more logistics than I have time for and I'm
Yeah,
willing to,
definitely.
yeah, willing to do.